Hi everyone and welcome to the internet. What we're going to be doing in today's lesson is having a look at the process of diffusion. So hopefully by the end of this lesson you'll be able to describe what diffusion is and explain when it happens. So to kick us off, what we've got are 5 questions on the screen there that I want you to have a go at answering in your books. So have a go answering those 5 questions in your books, and I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do that. So off you go. Okay, let's see how you've done then. Obviously, tick them if you've got them right, cross it if you've got it wrong, and I would suggest writing in the correct answers as we go. So, question 1, the 2 types of cell are prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Number 2, our parts in an animal cell are the cell membrane, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the mitochondria. You can give yourself a mark for each of them. Number 3, the parts of our plant cell. the cell membrane, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the mitochondria, so the same as our animal cell, plus the cell wall, the vacuole, and chloroplasts. Again, give yourself a tick for each of them. Number 4, a plasmid is a circular piece of DNA that stores extra genes. And finally, question 5, the purpose of the flagella is to allow cells to move through liquids. So add up your scores and let me know how many you got in the chat window. Let's see how we've done. Okay, so let's see if we do actually know what diffusion means. What I want you to do is, in your books, just write me down what you think diffusion actually means. Now, you might have done this lower down the school, you might not have done, but have a go now. What does diffusion mean? Write that definition in your books for me. I'll just give you 1 minute to do that. So, what we need to make sure then is that we do have this definition. So double check to see what you've got written down, but everyone needs to write down the definition on the screen right now, because this is the kind of exam stock definition, if you like. So diffusion is the net movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So we could also say that the particles are moving down a concentration gradient. So everyone get that written down in your books now. Again, I'll leave it on the screen just for a minute so you can get that done. Okay, so we know that when we're talking about diffusion, it's the net movement of our particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. But when do we think particles will stop moving? So just jot down your thoughts in your book. I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. Now, the correct answer to that is they don't. And I've got a little animation here just to explain why. In order to explain why the particles don't stop moving, we just need to think back to the work we've done on the motion of particles in a liquid. Remember, particles in a liquid are constantly moving in a random arrangement, as we can see the particles on the screen are doing. So they will keep moving in that random way throughout the time. If we now consider what will happen with a beaker of just water, and what we're going to do is drop a lump of sugar into it. Now obviously our sugar cube is made up of all those individual sugar particles, and when it goes into the water, then what's going to happen is it's going to dissolve, and those sugar particles are then going to be free to move. Now what we're going to find then is they start where the sugar was dropped in a high concentration, but as they start to move, then what we see is that they're moving from the high concentration to a lower concentration, which means they're going to be spreading out through that beaker, and you can see this in the animation there, that where we had them all concentrated in one area, the high concentration, they've now spread throughout the beaker to get an equal concentration in all those regions. So what we have is this equilibrium at this stage. So based on what we've just seen in that little animation, and just using a little bit of our brain power, what I want you to do is, in your books, I want you to create a series of diagrams to show what happens to the particles as time goes on, from the point that we burn some toast in our toaster to maybe half an hour later. So just draw me a series of diagrams, and I'm only talking about 3 diagrams is fine, like a little cartoon strip showing what happens from the point we burn the toast in diagram 1, the midway point in diagram 2, to the end point in diagram 3. So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to get your diagrams done, and don't forget, it's always good to label those diagrams as well, and hopefully we are drawing in pencil in our books just to maintain those nice presentation standards. So off you go, draw me those lovely diagrams. I'll just give you one more minute to finish those off, so make sure they're all drawn and labelled. So I've just given you an example of what we could have drawn in the picture at the bottom there. So we can see what's happening, that the particles that were close to the toaster first of all, those burnt bits of toast smell, then they start to diffuse through the air until they're spread out pretty evenly by the end. Couple of questions for you to have a go at answering in your books then. So the first one, where does diffusion take place in the body? And the second one, what chemicals are transported by diffusion? So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to answer those two questions in your book. Hopefully we managed to answer that diffusion takes place in the cells particularly, or at any of those exchange surfaces that we've got. And in terms of the chemicals transported by diffusion, then you could have mentioned things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, any of those key bits there. Okay, couple more questions for you to have a go at answering in your book then. We know what diffusion is. Now, what do we think will be the factors that affect the rate of diffusion? Just jot those down in a bullet point list, any factor that affects the rate of diffusion, and if you finish that, then see if you can explain how they would affect the rate. So 2 minutes, get that done for me in your books. So we're going to focus on 3 of these factors that will affect the rate of diffusion. The first one is distance, so jot down the couple of points at the top, then have a go at answering the question underneath. Now, what we actually find in terms of our pattern with distance is that the larger the distance, the slower the rate of diffusion. And that hopefully is just quite logical to you, because if you think about trying to travel a greater distance, it's going to take longer. So when we're talking about our particles trying to actually move across a greater distance, same thing. It takes them longer, so there's a slower rate of diffusion there. Now, where do we think there's a small distance for diffusion to occur over? I'll just give you another 30 seconds to see if you can get that answered for me. Hopefully, we've heard of exchange surfaces. So wherever we are having these exchanges designed to take place in our body, then we've got a small distance. So you could have mentioned in the lungs, or you could have mentioned things like the capillaries here. The second factor we have is the concentration gradient. Again, jot down that bit at the top for me. So in terms of our concentration gradient, then we see this pattern. The steeper the concentration gradient, the faster the rate of diffusion. Now, what that means is that if there's a bigger difference between the 2 sides of that membrane, so one's got a really high concentration and the other really low, then diffusion happens quicker. And again, I'll just give you about 30 seconds to jot down an example of where we're maintaining this steep concentration gradient in living things. Again, a really good answer here would be in the capillaries around our lungs, because what we're doing there is the blood is taking all of those gases away from the lungs as soon as they've transferred. The third factor we're going to consider is the surface area then. So again, jot down those points for me. The greater the surface area, the faster the rate of diffusion. And this is quite logical, I hope, because if we've got a greater surface area, then we've got more space for diffusion to occur over. So in that same period of time, more particles can actually cross that surface, and therefore we have a faster rate of diffusion. And again, see if you can have a go answering the question at the bottom. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. So again, we could have gone to our stock answer here of the lungs, where we've got the alveoli that increase the surface area, or we could have gone into the small intestine this time, where it's all folded up into those structures called villi, which again increase the surface area dramatically. Just to finish off then, here's some questions. So if your target grade is up to a 5, answer the ones on the left. If your target grade is above a 5, have a go at the ones on the right. Now, the answers to these questions will be on my website, so I'll leave these up for a couple of minutes and then I'll show you where you can find additional resources. So if you head on over to my website and then click the bit that says Internet School in the top right corner there, you'll find resources for the lessons for today. So head on over there, and other than that, I hope I'll see you again next week at the same time.